In most legal systems, figuring out who a child's parents are seems pretty simple. It's mostly about biology. But in Muslim law, it's a much deeper legal question. It's not just about who your parents are, but how they are legally recognized as your parents. Today, we're going to dive into this really intricate system, which is all built around marriage, the concept of legitimacy, and something totally unique called acknowledgement. So let's get right to it. What does it actually take to legally establish a child's parentage in Muslim law? Because I'll tell you, it's about way more than just a birth certificate. The answer is a fascinating mix of the parent's marital status, the exact timing of the birth, and even a formal declaration by the father. So let's start unraveling this legal puzzle together. All right, here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with marriage, because that's the absolute foundation for everything else. Then we'll look at what happens when you have direct proof of paternity. After that, we'll get into the trickier situations where proof is indirect. Then we'll hit the big one, the unique power of acknowledgement. And finally, we'll see why this all matters by exploring the very real legal consequences.
First up, marriage. I really can't overstate this. In Muslim law, a lawful marriage isn't just a social thing. It is the legal gateway to establishing a child's legitimate family line. Seriously, everything else we're about to talk about is built right on top of this idea.
And here is the golden rule, the one principle that shapes everything. It's actually incredibly straightforward. A child born to a lawfully married couple is legitimate. Period. A child born outside of that union is not. This single distinction is the key to the entire system.
Now this is where things get really interesting. Maternity, well, that's seen as a biological certainty, right? The woman who gives birth is the mother. No real mystery there. But paternity, that's a totally different story. It's viewed as a legal relationship that's established through the man's marriage to the child's mother. And it's that potential for uncertainty that explains why the law has created such specific rules to figure out a father's legal link to a child.
Okay, so let's talk about the most clear-cut cases. When you have a valid marriage that's documented, undisputed, no questions asked, the law uses a really precise set of rules, mostly based on timing, to figure out if a child is legitimate.
To take all the guesswork out of it, Muslim law relies on some very specific timelines. Just take a look at this table. A child born more than 6 months after the marriage date, the law presumes they are legitimate. That reflects the minimum time for gestation. But, and this is a big but, if the child is born within those first 6 months, the presumption flips. They're considered illegitimate, unless the father steps up and formally acknowledges the child. The law even covers what happens after marriage ends, saying a child is still legitimate if they're born within a pretty generous window of time, up to 2 years in some schools of law.
But, life isn't always that neat and tidy. What happens in those messier situations? What if there's no marriage certificate or direct evidence? Well, the law has other ways to establish parentage. This is where we shift from direct proof to indirect proof. So there are two main paths here. First, if a man and woman have been living together for a long, long time as if they were husband and wife, that can create a legal presumption that they were married. The second way is the father's own acknowledgement of the child as his, and we're going to dig into that one in a minute. But here's the most important takeaway, right there at the bottom. Both of these are just presumptions. They are strong legal clues, for sure, but they can be challenged and overturned if there's good evidence to the contrary. Okay, this brings us to what is, I would say, the most unique and fascinating part of this whole area of law, the doctrine of acknowledgement. And let me be clear, this is not adoption. It is something else entirely. This classic ruling from the Privy Council just captures the idea of acknowledgement perfectly. So let's break it down. It's saying you can't just point to a child you know is illegitimate and say, yep, that's my legitimate son. It doesn't work like that. But, and this is the whole point, in cases where paternity is a total question mark, where there's no proof either way, a father's statement acknowledging the child becomes incredibly powerful, substantive evidence. It basically fills that legal vacuum. I really need to hammer this point home because it is the #1 source of confusion. Acknowledgement is not a legal magic wand that you wave to make an illegitimate child legitimate. It's a rule of evidence. It doesn't change a fact that is already known. It only comes into play in that gray area of uncertainty to provide proof where there was none before. Now, for an acknowledgement to actually stick and be legally valid, it has to pass this 6-part test. Let's just walk through it. First, and we just covered this, paternity has to be genuinely uncertain. Second, the dad can't just say, "That's my kid." He has to specifically say it's his legitimate kid. Third, the age difference has to make sense. He has to be old enough to be the father. Fourth, the child can't be the known result of an illicit affair or zina. Fifth, pretty obvious, the child can't already have a legally established father. And finally, number 6, if the child is old enough to understand, they can't turn around and reject the acknowledgement. So why are we going through all these complicated rules? Why does it matter so much? Because establishing parentage and proving legitimacy, that's the key that unlocks a whole set of absolutely critical legal rights and responsibilities. An illegitimate child, in legal terms, is called a filius nullius. It's Latin, and it literally translates to child of no one. This means they have no legal lineage, or nasab, connecting them to their biological father, and that has huge, huge implications, especially when it comes to one of the most important rights in all of family law. And this right here, this is where the rubber meets the road. Just look at the difference in inheritance rights. On the left, a legitimate child gets full inheritance rights from both parents. Simple. But look at that drop-off. Under Hanafi law, an illegitimate child can inherit from their mother, but not from their biological father. And under Shia law, the rule is even stricter. They can't inherit from either parent. This just shows how absolutely critical that legal status of legitimate is, especially for things like family wealth and property. And this brings us right back around. A valid acknowledgement closes the loop. It doesn't just establish who the father is. It grants the child full legitimacy. And that means they get all the rights that come with it, including that all-important right to inherit from their father. It also creates a legal bond between the father and the child's mother. It's a game changer. So we'll end with a big question for the modern age. We've just walked through this incredibly sophisticated legal framework, built on presumptions and declarations, all to solve the age-old problem of uncertain paternity. But today, well, today we have DNA testing, which can give us a pretty definitive biological answer. So how do these ancient legal principles hold up? What is their role in a world of genetic certainty? It's a fascinating crossroads where law, tradition, and science all meet. Thanks for joining me.